David Heinemeier Hansson, everyone. Obviously, good friend of mine. I have a privilege to call you a good friend. We have a lot of common history. David famously built the Ruby on Rails framework, which is perfectly on topic as a incredible combinatory product of putting a lot of great technologies together in a novel way. At a time where this was crucial during the early internet, and we worked a little bit on this together for a spell, and then obviously Shopify is built on Ruby on Rails. And we're talking today because David is joining the Shopify board of directors, and that's first of all, that is really, really, really great, and probably something between 1 and 20 years too late. And but the second best time to plant a tree is today. The best time was 30 years ago, as they say. And so this is what we're doing now, and that's really, really great. And we can wax very poetically about, I hope, or entirely bizarre, depending on how you think about the previous conversation about the early days of the internet. But we like talking today because one of the products of the open web and the things that could only exist because of David's work on Ruby on Rails that inspired me to kind of be more ambitious and build something larger than I certainly initially set out. One of the products of this, amongst many, is Shopify, and so thank you for agreeing to join. And and what is why did you say yes?
So do you know what's funny? And I'll give the raw story, and you could cut it out if it's too spicy. But the raw story, of course, this is in part started as a conversation
of all the best stories, by the way.
That just started with a conversation. I think I kind of was lamenting to you that I haven't seen a lot of good boards. I've been on a fair number of boards, and I've been bored on a lot of those boards because we weren't often dealing with interesting problems, in my opinion. And some of that is then that kind of board work can descend just into checkbox checking or sort of procedural oversight, which is not really my main area of interest.
Like a profit or a foundation board or something like this, or like a charity board?
Not so much the foundation. I think the foundation has some interesting stuff. I've been more involved on the startup side with some boards, and had that kind of experience. Sometimes we'd go over the financials.
Right.
And you're like, all right, that's interesting, and it's important. I think a board serves a really important role in that regard. But what I really sort of was lamenting to you was this idea that we weren't struggling with really interesting problems. And perhaps part of it is at the startup scale, I feel like I've been through a fair number of those problems. And what fascinated me so much about the Shopify option here is that Shopify is dealing with things at a much larger scale than I've ever had the privilege to dive into. And I think that just opens a novelty, just for me personally, totally selfishly, to go, I want to see what those problems look like. I love problems. I love organizational problems. I love hiring problems. I love technical problems. I love business model problems. I love strategy problems. I love all these different kinds of problems. And I mostly love them when there's some degree of novelty to them, right? When I haven't done it 5 times already. That can also be valuable, and sometimes as a board, that's what you're there to do. You're there to impart your experience and so forth. But again, selfishly, when this discussion came up, Tobi, it was really just that opportunity to like, oh, I can look at some really big problems I'd never have access to in my own work. I mean, I've been running 37 Signals with Jason Fried for well over 20 years now. And the kind of problems that we've hit are problems dealing with employees 80 or less, right? So suddenly dealing with thousands of employees, and not just employees in a grand scheme, although that's also so interesting, but how do you deal with like thousands of programmers? I've been dealing with tens of programmers in most cases, right? Working on a lot of projects where in many cases we're 5 programmers. How do you scale those things up? And I think that's what's so interesting is, I mean, the shared joke in the Rails world is, but does Rails scale? And when most people talk about that, they talk about it in technical terms, right? That's just a boring question. And I I think at Rails World, I pull up your tweet from the Black Friday last year, right? Like just unfathomable scale. Like the amount of commerce that flows through Shopify is just web scale in its truest sense. So that's just such a resounding rejection of that nonsense question, does Rails scale on a technical sense? But on a organizational scale, on a programmer scale, on a technical scale, it's still a really interesting problem because, in my opinion, it's not so much about Rails or not Rails. It's about computer science in general. We have not cracked the nut on how do you make thousands of programmers collaborate productively over decades on the same code base. I mean, when you have millions of lines of code, regardless of whether you write it in Ruby or C or Go or whatever, you're facing frontier problems in a way that we don't have the answers for. And I think that that's just such a fascinating quest to go in there and it's like, how can we're not going to fix it. So I think this is one of the things that I'm really fascinated with. I'm fascinated with problems that actually can't be fixed. I'm fascinated with problems where you're measuring your progress in terms of incremental steps forward. Could we make this 10% better? Could we make it 20% better? Sometimes you end up making things 200% better, and that's great. But a lot of the times you get 2% here, 5% here, 3% here, and you just keep doing that for a decade. And suddenly you look back and you can't even recognize where you came from. You can sort of squint and see like, oh, wow, look at that. Look at that cumulative progress we've been able to make. And again, I've been doing that a lot at my scale for the company that I run on a daily basis. I've never had the opportunity to be in the machine room for something as grand and actually as structurally important to the internet as Shopify. I mean, as much as I love working on Basecamp, I love working on Hey, they're not structurally important to the internet. Shopify is. There are not a lot of structurally important companies to the modern internet, to commerce in the world today. There's like, I don't know, 2 handfuls, and Shopify is one of them. So I just feel like it was an opportunity. It wasn't even like I couldn't say no to, but I was just rushing. Yes.
Yeah, it was very quick. Yes, I was impressed.
You didn't need to twist my arm much.
Yeah. No, I totally understand. Like, I mean, especially getting like what makes this scale so fun amongst a lot of other things is that it's not for everyone for sure, but like I always feel like every morning I get a completely new and unpredictable set of puzzles, like a box full of puzzles dumped on my desk. And like my job is to like try to make the best of those puzzles, right? Like, and it's just like, it's never the same. It's always different. And very often it's, the puzzles don't even have all the pieces. And frankly, sometimes the best way to deal with it is like just make one composite like puzzle out of the pieces that happen to be fit, and sometimes you need to bring out the hammer, right? Like it's just like you actually invent a new picture every single time with a even though someone tried to get you to sort of preordained puzzles. And it's actually like there's a lot of creativity to this, but what's definitely true is it's frontier stuff because humanity has not figured out how to build companies. Absolutely, it's every piece of advice contradicting a position. Like everything you'll ever hear about companies is either an irreversible statement, meaning it's a platitude that is completely devoid of any kind of value because no one would take the opposite position, or it's one where you can find 2 great companies that will have exactly the opposite belief. It actually like either because our corpus of understanding of how to build large organizations that are really mission driven and build like absolute world class excellence is so poor that almost everything works equally well or not well depending on your position on that, or but it's one of those areas where actually just kind of everything works as long as you really, really pursue it and drive for sort of iterative excellence in that particular way, right? Like, it's like almost all the great companies are quite different. Often people say almost all the companies that are kind of fucked up are all the same, like because like they sort of converge on some kind of nothingness kind of position of bureaucracy that will drive people like you, me, and most of the people listening away. But it's it just that's that's what's interesting. It's like there's no map, there's no book you can buy. You just kind of have to explore the space that is kind of your own. Because at least at this scale, like we're just like, how do we cause more entrepreneurship on the internet? Like this is very valuable. Like it's really meaningful to me. And like, man, every single time we make something simpler or possible that was not someone else is going to use this to build business that otherwise wouldn't exist. And that's such a great thing to do, right? And so it's fascinating to see this and get to do this. Sometimes I wish I could then afterwards, after meeting, hearing about all this, go do something else. Like as in like people like on my board who get to say, that was really interesting. I wonder how Tobi's going to fix all this, and like I'll hear about it 3 months from now. It's like that sounds like a good gig.
I think sometimes I think about this as the uncle blessing, right? I mean, I have 3 kids, but I often hear from people who are uncles on, they're like, oh, I get to borrow kids for a while, and then I have to give them back. I think this is what the pleasure of being on a board is. I get to borrow your problems for a little while, and then I also get to give them back. But I also think that there's just something magical about frontier problems where the potential impact is literally on world GDP. Mm-hmm. That's this thing that comes with scale that inspires me. Like I'm very much otherwise in my own personal business, very much on the small scale where I'm talking about my personal direct impact that I can have if I sit down and program really well. We can make an impact on one of the apps that we work on. But at Shopify, you can literally tilt the world. I think that is that's a blessing and the curse that comes with operating from such a level of success and from impact, right? And I think that at some point, at least for me, I just get drawn out of the micro and into the macro. And Shopify operates on a macro level, not just in terms of the world economy, although it also does that. It's also a macro level in terms of its internal universe. Because Tobi, you can't just sit down and go like, all right, I'm just going to sequester myself for 2 weeks and I'm going to rewrite Shopify. That has long since been beyond the sort of option of any human, no matter how good, like the best program in the world, you could gather many of them. You're not going to be able to rewrite Shopify because you now exist at a scale and you solve so many problems for so many people at such a scale that it is a collective endeavor in a way that you have to act through other people and not just one layer of other people, right? Like you have to act through multiple layers of other people and talk about something we have not figured out fully. Right? How do you actually transport a vision for going forward through multiple layers of an organization, which it inevitably has to have once you're dealing with thousands of people, right? In many ways, it's a marvel of modern organizational technique, as flawed as it is, that we're able to productively get thousands of people to roughly walk in the same direction. I mean, individually, they're all walking in different direction, but companies that work well have at least a large mass going towards some specific goal. And also having the clarity of that goal. I often think of just the blessing it is to have such an overarching mission as to promote entrepreneurship in the world, to get more commerce in the world, to get more exchange, to open markets, to make markets more efficient. And you know what's funny is there's that abstract goal, and I think that's really inspiring. And then I see the concrete implementation of it, and my mind is blown 10x. I'll give you one example. Yeah. So I recently got into mechanical keyboards. This happened just about a year ago. And when I got into mechanical keyboards, I was marveling at 2 things. First, the variety. I was like, isn't this such a niche thing? Why are there literally just dozens and dozens of producers of it? That's incredible. So I get all these options to try. And second of all, they all run on Shopify. Literally every single one of them. I don't think I've a mechanical keyboard in the last year, and I bought like a closet full. They all sold through Shopify. And I go, do you know what? That's not just a coincidence. There's actually a connection between those 2 things. There's actually a connection between the vibrancy of a market and the barriers to entry. The ease with which a bunch of producers in China or elsewhere suddenly can have access to markets all over the world and have access in a way where I feel no hesitation whatsoever. As soon as I see it's a Shopify store, I'm like, I'm not going to get ripped off. I mean, I'm sure there's fraud as there is in any large system. But generally speaking, it's just such a vouch of confidence without it all getting pulled into one Amazon, right? Now, I think Amazon has been phenomenally successful at what they do, but I think there's some very distinct trade-offs, and it's not the internet model, right? It's the walled garden model. And the fact that Shopify has been able to sort of take the best of that, the fact that we can have credibility and reliability and trust in the market, that's just an exponential function for increased commerce.
Like, and to your earlier point of this idealistic vision of the 90s that people had of the internet. Like, I obviously Shopify is to a certain degree centralized software that's owned by a for-profit company. But it, again, the sort of core vision here is that it helps people reach for independence, right? Like, and I mean, that's really the act of entrepreneurship is one of the best ways of doing this and of self-expression. And we challenge people to, like, what do you have to add? Like, and this is some of these niche are just wonderful for this because it's like mechanical keyboards is vibrant because it is a only, like, there's no solution. There's just different sets of trade-offs and actually a lot of aesthetics and a lot of personalization. And so a lot of people have something to add. And so there's a much bigger market now that exists. And then people can like put these little outposts on the internet that are like, here's my world. Like I'm inviting you to my world. Like the only two things that you can own on the internet truly are your domain and your mailing list, right? Like, it's just funny because we have both sides of this with our product. I think everything else is sort of leased, and if in a marketplace, my sort of criticism of marketplaces is, although I think they're like obviously stunning successes and very valuable and important, is that it's just really hard to resist using all of your leverage over time there, because it's like clearly you are directing the sale as a marketplace. So in that, the entrepreneurs have to, out of necessity, be squeezed at some point because they are kind of the middle. They're not the customers of a marketplace. They are kind of suppliers, or they have a crop, depending on how you think about it. And so it's actually fun to really just get at this in this sort of 19th aesthetic, like a solution, which is like a aesthetic where you go and say, okay, well, merchants, you are the ones. You are our clear customers. You pay us money, and then we like try to push and like make this the best deal that's ever existed. You give us $29, and we somehow finagle your conversion rate to be incredibly high. If there's anyone who wants like to try, like with Shop, try to cause sales and do like a million things besides to that at least everything we can do to make it so that you can actually focus on making these products, these things that you set out to add and gift to the world. If there's another side to this, if other people want it, we'll help you figure it out. And I think that's just really important and will cause too much. Like, it just leads to more vibrancy and so on. And like it's fun to be able to push this sort of somewhat aged and maybe dated vision and actually kind of make it work. It's funny because I think we were talking about a Porsche 911 once, which is a dumb idea of a car, right? Like, it's like it shouldn't, like, no one should make a car that's like has the engine in the back because it's like way too heavy, and you have all these problems that come just from a bad idea. But like, German doggedness kind of just like made it into the best car ever because like it's just like they just like loved this idea and just like kind of iterated on it and made it work, right? Like, added, those are great cars. Like, I don't think anyone would take the other side of that. But it's fundamentally a flawed idea on the starting point. And some people have made the parallel to Shopify at some points too, right? Like, it's clearly easier to make a marketplace, but like, hey, we kind of made it work, which is fun.
And I think that's also the appeal of this variety, that you end up with sort of quirky things that then become the most lovable. Why is it that the 911 is perhaps the most iconic sports car of all times? It is because, not in spite of, but because of its quirkiness, because of its weird incentives. And I think especially the thing about incentives, with Porsche, they're so incentivized because there's so much lore around the 911, right? And we're going to make it work. Even if the fundamental idea was perhaps a little off, we're going to make it work. And I think what you were just talking about, that Shopify has been structured around some incentives where you win when they win in a way where it doesn't become adversarial. And I think this is at the heart of a lot of the problems we have with the internet and commerce in general, is when those fundamental incentives are not pointing in the right direction. They're not sort of, we will all win when the pie gets bigger kind of things. Then even the best intentions in the world has a tendency to lose over the long term if the incentives are not aligned. And I think that's why the fundamental premise of Shopify is so strong and has been going so well for 20 years, and why you've been able to iterate on the idea as a 911 for so long is because the fundamental incentive alignment is very powerful. And I think that's one of the things that's actually quite hard to clone. You can compete with it. Sometimes a marketplace can be able to offer merchants certain things that, we're going to feature you, we're going to give you free advertising, we're going to do all sorts of other things. Yeah, okay, that's true. But over the long run, I strongly believe incentives are what's going to win. And incentives is what's going to drive things forward. And so to have incentives that are aligned and kept in check with what you just said, what can you own on the internet? You can own your domain, you can own your mailing list. Both of those things are portable. If Shopify suddenly turned to crap, it became a bad product and it was slow and it didn't keep up, merchants actually have a control lever. They can go,
you can download your templates.
Yes.
You can host it somewhere else. It's going to be a little bit of time in the editor to, or using the open source liquid gem to kind of create something of your own. But everyone's allowed to do it. This is a point. It's like, you know what the best mode is for a business? Fucking merit. That is just the best mode.
Yes.
So you don't
need
to actually.
What's so interesting is if you look at business incentives in general, they're lined up, in fact, sort of to avoid that, right? Best business is if you can somehow get a moat and you can put a toll booth in the right places that you're not accountable to merit. But when I say best business, that might mean most profitable in the short term. It may also mean resource curse. It may also mean you actually trap your business in a pathology state that isn't ultimately for the very, very long run good for that business at all. Versus if you set up your business with aligned incentives that are kept in check by the fact that your customers could go somewhere else. They're not your prisoners. They are there, they're your patrons because they actually believe that what you have to offer is better than the alternative. That is one of those forcing functions that continuously require the organization to be responsive, to be innovative, to be all the other things that if you look at not just like the next 5 years, but you look at the next 10 years, the next 20 years, the next 30 years, you want those mechanisms. They can be annoying sometimes, right? Like you're constantly under pressure to actually make good stuff. But when you think on the broad picture of things, isn't that what you want? Isn't that why you want to be on top? Isn't that why you want to be profitable and whatever? Because it's a product, it's a reward of doing just great things. Once you fall into this trap that it no longer matters whether you're building good software or not, I think you've already lost. Yeah. I mean, Steve Jobs has this wonderful quote about, I think it's IBM, what happens when you have a monopoly, suddenly it's the salespeople who drive all the business. The engineers can't do anything, so you make a better photocopier. What does it matter if you have a monopoly on photocopiers? The customer's still going to buy it, whether it's bad or it's good. So escaping that, forcing yourself to be accountable to the market, I think is perhaps the best long-term incentive you can set up for a business that strives to be around for decades, not just a few years.
And I think exposing yourself to the real competition that's not like you didn't like figure out how to like inoculate yourself from is actually like absolutely it's you have to do this if you want to build a real business. Otherwise, you're building something that cosplays being a real business, but it's actually protected by other means. Like the printer example is so tangible because like one of the fastest growing Shopify stores is a company called Bamboo Labs, which makes a 3D printer that's just remarkable.
I think one from your recommendation.
Okay. Right, I recommended it to you, and you got one. I have used it. Is it being used in your house? Like,
oh, it's been running nonstop.
Exactly,
In fact,
same
I
thing.
need some maintenance on it because we ran it so much. We ran it basically 24/7 for 2 weeks, and now there's something clogged I need to fix.
Yeah. So you ran into the like, okay, like, and it probably sent you a message saying, hey, my LiDAR scanner figured out that something is not right, and here's
Yes.
the way to fix it with a QR code linked to YouTube. And you're like, cool. Yeah, mine runs all the time. My kids have like a Shopify store selling fidget spinners printed from it. And so it's like it's an amazing product. And it's like, think about it. This thing prints objects in 3D. That is ridiculously complex. My actual printer in my house is always broken. It's just like, it has one job. It's like black and white, it's a laser printer. Just trying to like, here's a page, make a page plus a couple of characters on it. That's all. It has this one job, constantly fails because there's no competition in this world. Then here's 3D printer that has like costs the same amount and just like mine has been running forever. And it's like, it's remarkable. You kind of need competition because Bamboo exists with amongst many companies wanting to provide this service or this product, and they are just like, I think they care more than everyone else because they made an incredible product, and now they're succeeding, and that's good. Anyways, this has been super, super fun. I never know how these conversations go. This one went from a macro into a micro, into back into macro, into random other topics that is like I could never predict it, and I loved every second of it. Thank you, David, for joining. This is super fun, yeah.
My pleasure. Absolutely. I can't wait to be there at the first board meeting to get some of those juicy problems and hope I can add some insights.
Careful what you wish for. Awesome.